Welcome to All the Way Authentic. I'm your host, Kevin P. Henry. Today I speak with author Corinne Cavanaugh, who talks about her new novel, An Audacious Woman. All on All the Way Authentic. I'm your host, Kevin P. Henry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Corinne Cavanaugh, and I was born in Arizona, moved up here to Washington State when I was 4. And, my parents were just struggling to make it. My dad got a big job at Boeing, so that's why we moved. And I'm a Pacific Northwest, born and raised. I eventually moved to the big city, well, as quickly as possible. Uh, 18, got out of the small town, went to the big city, and I've been over here ever since. And I've had a lot of different career journeys, but marketing really has been the through line of it all. And just a couple of years ago, I decided I wanted to be an author. So I went ahead and did that. That's about me.
Well, and I'm thinking that having a marketing background and experience in that would serve you well, especially when you write a book and then you can, I mean, not that you wouldn't get marketing assistance, but you definitely have some insight into how to market a product, so to speak. But briefly, just touch on the marketing career, if you could. Just tell us a little bit about that and what you liked about it or what was challenging about it.
Yeah, I think it's like the psychology of it, that you can come forward and convince the right people to do something you want them to do. So I thought that was fascinating. It's kind of why I studied it in school and college. And my first degree was actually business, which a business management degree, which is extremely helpful and broad. Then I started to sort of delve into marketing. And at one point I was working as a marketing director for an entrepreneurial woman. And I found her inspiring, and we sort of became almost partners. That's marketing is where the rubber hits the road, especially when you're promoting like in-person events and using the internet to do that. People either show up or they don't. And so that's one thing that I really enjoy about marketing. And it kind of kicked off my career. I said, okay, I can do this and it's demonstratable and it can work. And so after that, it was kind of an interesting time. It was 2008, and I was a recruiter at a staffing firm. I wasn't loving that kind of work, and I was getting laid off, right? Because no one is hiring when in a recession. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do? So I went to this partner woman, and I said, hey, I want to work for you. And so then I did that for a while, and I thought, I can start my own business. And so it was then a long time ago. I started my first business. It was a social media marketing company. And it was when companies were really resistant to social still. They thought, oh gosh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to get on Twitter. I don't, this is just a passing fad. And of course it wasn't. And I thought, okay, well, these companies need help with that. So that I started that business, built a small team. We were doing a community management is what they call it. So, we had probably about 40 different social accounts, 13 different countries that we were, there's some Google Translate was used, I will say. We were just doing all the content development, all the publishing for them, interacting with their audiences. And people didn't know it was us, right? They thought it was that company. Fast forward, no surprise, I get burnt out because social is so 24 hours. I think, okay, I'm not going to do this. And so I went back to corporate America, and I worked for Safeco Liberty and was a digital marketing trainer for them. So that was really fun because I was single, not married. I had no kids. And so I flew across the whole country and did like workshops, 6-hour long workshops, and did online courses and stuff like that. These smaller insurance agencies, they just didn't know what to do with online marketing. So after that, serial entrepreneur, I admit, I thought, okay, well, I can't, I can't be here in corporate for so long. So then I ping ponged back and started another business. This was at a time where I was involved with Rotary, and I thought, oh, okay, there are all these nonprofits who really need digital marketing help. So I started doing consulting that way. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I had my son and sort of reevaluated, went to Microsoft for a while, doing customer engagement stuff for a VP, very similar to marketing because you're the face with the customer on behalf of the VP. And that was really interesting too. But then I just decided, I had my third baby. I thought, okay, I'm going to write a book now. This is the time. I'm going to sort of break away, write that novel I've been meaning to write. And that's where we are.
Great. Well, you brought us up to the recent present, I guess, or a little bit into the past. But I wanted, before we dive into the book, I wanted
Yeah,
to just backtrack a little bit into the marketing
sure.
thing because I put together marketing panels, or I put together media panels. My background is more in journalism and public relations,
Mhm.
but it's interesting because I think that there's this kind of love-hate relationship on the part of nonprofits and some businesses, in that they know they need it, but they're also a little bit apprehensive,
Yeah.
because I remember setting up interviews for nonprofits, CEO or the executive director, and some of them were very polished and loved it, but others are like, well, what do you mean the reporters, what are they going to ask me? And
Yeah.
they would just have these huge anxiety attacks. And like I told him, I said, you can spend literally thousands of dollars on advertising, right? Or you can spend absolutely nothing and wind up on the 5 o'clock news and reach 5 times the amount of people than you would with the ad.
Yeah.
And it's not costing you anything. And you get to save it too, because you can put it on in your media kit as well. And so
Yeah.
that would usually convince them, because you're on the news at 5 o'clock, and I mean, I don't know what the numbers are. It could be 20,000 people could see you in just a 1 minute segment. That's not going to see you if you spend all the advertising money. The only other thing I would add is that social media can be scary sometimes, but it's
Mhm.
so interesting when you're doing marketing. You have to be so careful about the language that you use, the
Mhm.
imagery, the photographs, because somebody can look at an ad or read something and go completely off the deep end and
Oh, yeah.
totally interpret it in a completely different way than you intended it, just by looking at a photograph, for instance, or the
Yeah.
photograph you might have chosen. Any Before we get into the book, any advice for anybody thinking about going into marketing?
Yeah. What's interesting about that is you've sort of got this older school mentality around what's safe. And it feels very safe to go on TV. You've got specific talking points as long as you trust your spokesperson. But the online world, it feels scary. And it is scary because it is kind of the Wild West. But as brands, you have to put forward both, right? You have to put both your canned messaging in earned media placements on TV or newspapers and that sort of thing. But you also have to put forward an authentic version of your brand for each social platform that resonates with each of those audiences. And that's all different and it should all go together with paid advertising. So that's the one thing I think that, um, you know, people get caught in this sort of this or that, like either or thinking. And that's not how it should work. It should all go together and it should be cohesive. But just knowing your different audiences are using different channels and buying into different things, I could see an article in the New York Times and go, oh, wow, this is really trustworthy to me. Whereas, someone else might never see that article and not think it's trustworthy, even if they saw it. So you really do have to consider the multi-channel marketing angle. And I think for students or whoever might be studying marketing or considering a marketing career, you have to diversify all of your marketing. You have to know the branding core and what all that's about and before you can even get into, the online marketing and paid advertising, that sort of thing.
Mhm. Thank you very much for that. Very nice and concise. So the book. So tell us about the book. And of course, you're talking about a book that you want people to go out and buy. So you don't want to give away too much. I understand that. But first of all, what inspired you to write this particular story, and tell us what that story is.
Yeah, what inspired me? I really did have a dream about the main character. I've always sort of had an active imagination. And so I woke up, I thought, oh, well, this lady's interesting. The main character is a quirky 85-year-old woman from New York. She owns one of these rare Gilded Age Manhattan mansions. There's still a few around today, so it's modern day And it's just her being sort of outrageous, especially for someone of her age. And so I thought, okay, well, I need to write this. And so then I went back to the drawing board, right? Because I've written academic works, but I've never written a novel before this. So I went on to master class and learned. I got a subscription there, and I listened to all of James Patterson's advice, all of Margaret Atwood's advice, and I took notes, and I was really studious about it. And then I thought, okay, I'm gonna make this book. I'm gonna do this outline, and I'm doing it for a couple different reasons, and we can get into that. But I really also just wanted this book because I thought it was fun. Like I think the characters are great, and it's a fun fiction novel that just kind of leaves you smiling and leaves you inspired. It's called An Audacious Woman. So I'm marketing it to women. It's for women, but kind of reflects on some things from the protagonist's past, which is fun because she's so old, right? She's been around to see a lot of different things in our history. So those little sprinkles are a good time.
Now, I've come to understand that there's also some content in there about historical events. And I don't know how much you can get into that, but maybe you could talk about how you approach that, because it's like when I go see a movie sometimes, and I love to read movie reviews after I've seen the movie. And
Mhm.
and I'm sure you've seen this, where you can read one review and they'll say this is the greatest film and that was made in modern history or whatever, and then somebody else will just trash it. And I'm like thinking, is this the same movie? So I'm wondering,
Yeah.
you have to go about your work with a certain amount of sensitivity and nuance, but what's your approach to dealing with historical events?
I think you have to research it thoroughly before touching it. I mean, because even if it's fiction, right? So it's a pretend story, it's fake, people know that. It will bring them out of the scene. Like if you're a quality writer, when people are reading, they really get in and they can feel like they're there in their mind. They're imagining it actively. And if you say something that's not accurate or misrepresents, or even if it's fiction, it just snaps them out of the story and they go, oh my gosh, this is just not believable, or I don't like this, or I don't like this writer. So you
Hmm.
really have to be careful. And that's what I did. Even just thinking about the setting, if people are from that location, people are from Manhattan. If I had said, oh, one of the characters, Brooke, walks down the road 2 blocks and she's at the subway entrance. Well, if that's not accurate to where you're saying that it is, people get tripped up over those things and they just get really annoyed. So, beyond like location, yeah, when you're talking about historical events, I feel like it's ethically the right thing to do to represent the event how it was intended to be, and or a real version of the history that could have been. So, there's a lot of different things. There's one really fun scene where somebody notices a photo on the wall from Eleanor, and it's like this party. And it turns out it's Studio 54. And so she tells about this story about how she was the maitre d' and how people couldn't get in and all these things. And it's a fun story, but you better believe I looked at pictures to figure out what did that actually look like? How could I accurately represent this? And so people would be sort of teleported into that world. And I try to do that again and again. There are some more serious topics that come up, but there's also fun topics. And I think each one of them requires research, even if it's fiction.
And now you wrote something about the freedom rides
I did. I
as
did.
well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things I thought was interesting about having a main character that's 85 years old is you can dip back. So she dips back and she says, "Oh, in my 60s, I was into advocacy, and I wanted to do good things in the world, and I sort of had this mindset of that. Back then, women of that time weren't encouraged to have a job, so she was a wealthy woman who wanted help, and you know that is how I depict her. And I'm very careful to depict her as a well-intentioned helper, because there are a lot of incredible people who led the freedom rides and were involved in the movement for civil rights and enforcing the Supreme Court laws that came out and were turning the tide. Um, and they weren't this character, and they weren't people like this character. So I was very careful on that and sort of calling out key influential people, like Diane Nash and like all of these different people who were epically uh, leading these efforts for the freedom rides. And she was a helper, and something dramatic happened, and she gets actually sent to a penitentiary. And I profiled a woman who this actually happened to in real life, sort of told a version of her story as if it was Eleanor, the main character, to sort of represent that truth, or kind of keep that at least in the realm of truth. Um, because I think it's okay to acknowledge people were helpers, but I didn't want the white knight sort of say, white lady saves the day narrative that I think too often we hear about.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially in today's times when there's so much attention to diversity, equity, being inclusive. There's a lot of focus on race, and then there's also just this focus on the pushback of teaching history in some places. I mean, in some places, people want to teach history and they want to uncover all of these facts and interesting things that occurred in history that they didn't learn in school. And then there's on the other side, you have people that are saying, oh, well, why are you bringing that up? That's so divisive. And now people are going to feel bad and all this other stuff. And so I've always felt it's kind of ridiculous to say that history is divisive. It's history. I mean, it's what happened. I mean, how can it be? It's not like it's somebody made up the freedom rides. It
Yeah,
really
but there's
happened.
a revisionist history out there. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
when you have textbooks that were edited to make certain groups appear less guilty than, other groups, there's one thing to have national pride, right? And to be proud of your country, and nationalism can be a good thing. But when you're using that lens to only tell positive, good stories, it becomes a bad thing because you're not learning from the past anymore. And so I think that I don't envy the job of historians who are writing textbooks, because the history is so nuanced and vast. You can't say everything. So you have to cut things out. And then if you cut certain things out, you might encounter accusations. But, there's no denying that in the past, in US history, in our textbooks, they have been revised, right? And you can see this as a continuing thought process when you think about like book bans. Why do we want to ban certain books? Well, you're trying to prevent people from learning certain things, and with children that can be appropriate, but not with everybody, certainly. And the public library system is a way for everyone to learn. And I think that it's just we really, as a society, need to be very careful about what we write in our history books and what we ban in our libraries.
I totally agree. Do you picture this book or series as a movie or one of those, what do they call them, ministries? Is that what they call them on TV, where you have a
Yeah, miniseries. Oh, I would
miniseries?
love that. Oh, goodness, I would love that. I'm just a visual person. Like I was describing, sort of, if I'm reading, I'm imagining it in my mind, and I hope readers do too. And that's the reason I did that book trailer, because it's so visual. And you could say it's sort of like Bridgerton meets Sex in the City, kind of a vibe, right? So I would hope it'd become a mini series. I think that'd be a lot of fun, and yeah, why not? I'd watch it.
Well, let me ask you this as a writer, because I've wondered, even I watch a fair amount of TV, and sometimes, you're watching a series and all of a sudden, they kill off the main character, or not the main character, but some character, and you're shocked. I can't believe they killed off so and so, kind of thing. And then sometimes you find out, oh, well, the person's leaving the show, so that's why they had to kill him off. But very often I've heard writers say that the characters had an arc, and it's like, okay, you're one of the characters, and they kind of know ahead of time that you're, 6 episodes later, you're really not going to be part of this. But when you were writing this book and this story, did you kind of know ahead, kind of like how this is going to end or what's going to be happening? Or was it more kind of like you might have thought you did, but then all of a sudden you go, wow, wait a minute, I'm going to go left instead of going right here, if that makes
That's
sense.
a good question. I think so I think all writers have a different process. For me, the outline is super important. I will spend months getting my outline right so that I know what series of events, what really important scenes I want to have at different times. And that makes it helpful too, because you don't have to go back as often to insert a little hint because you're kind of inadvertently hinting throughout the whole thing to kind of keep people moving along. And yeah, I think so. For me in this book, I knew the main things of what I wanted to happen, but it's totally different when you go, to write at the keyboard because you'll start to write the chapter and the scene and it will kind of go a little sideways. And then you have to decide, do I like that sideways? Just does it get everything off track for the whole rest of the book? And maybe it does. Maybe it's cool enough that you're okay with that. But a lot of times it doesn't. And so in my process, after I wrote a full first draft, I actually approached a developmental editor. There's a great resource called readsy.com, and you can match and find a good editor for your books. And so he has a really nuanced history in publishing, and so he told me with the developmental edit, yeah, you could go this way or you could go this way. Like, it was a conversation we had around because I had all these additional ideas I had sort of set to the side to not mess up my flow of the book, but I thought they were cool. And so we had that discussion. And that's really key to have somebody like that in your corner, right? That knows what's interesting for people to read and can help identify where to go.
Was there ever a time that you got writer's block?
Oh yeah, sure. Oh yeah, sure, but not like super blocked, I wouldn't say. One of the things I think Margaret Atwood was sort of adamant about was sort of come to the page every single day. Go write something every single day. Even if you're stuck, just write something you intend to throw out and then go for a walk. And so I would do that, if I thought, I don't really know if I like where this is going, whatever. I would just go for a walk and it's amazing what happens. You kind of get this inspiration. I don't know if it's fresh air or what, but it helps you work through things, at least me.
Well, what would you say to a high school student or a college student or just anybody really that's thinking about, I want to be an author or I want to write a book, and especially maybe just touch on the skills that are necessary, the skills and then maybe even the mentality that's
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
needs
I
to be
think
there.
I think maybe it has to do with the name of this book. You do have to be audacious. If you have something to say, you got to get out there and say it. And one way that you can do that is through writing a book, and you have to be determined because it's not always easy. It's not always fun, right? Especially when you're kind of working through those writer's block times, or you're thinking about a subject and you have to do all this research for it, or the tail end. You already wrote a book and gotta maybe put it on the chopping block because your editor said you had to do this or that, or it's not always fun. So having the discipline to come to it every single day is really hard. And you might be thinking, well, how would you know about that, Corinne? You're doing this full time now. Well, when I started writing the book, I wasn't. And I have three young kids and I was working full time in tech. And I thought I really want to write this. So I started getting up at 5 a.m. I would write from 5 to 7 a.m. Every single day. Even if it wasn't very much. Now, some days it just flows right out, right? You could just get it all down. And some days it doesn't. And you just got to know that progress is not linear. And I would also say to students, there's no wrong choice, right? Like, do I go this way? Do I go this way? Can I be an author, or should I go, get my accounting certificate? There's no wrong choice. Just do it. You have a long life. You can just do multiple things your whole life. Try something, see if you like it. If you don't, do something else. It's less of a big deal. I remember myself, I would totally get tripped up like that because I'm sort of that type A personality. So I would just go, oh my gosh, I'm not sure. What if I go the wrong direction? No, none of that. You just have to just do it and try something. If it doesn't work out, move on. It's just an ego block. Get over yourself
Hmm.
and keep going.
Well, and some people are late bloomers. And what I tell some people, because my background is in journalism, and I used to tell people, students, get used to giving more detail to even over detail to even explaining your
Mhm.
trip to the movie the other night. Because so many people, and I don't know if it's young people, older people, hey, what'd you do last night? Oh, I went to this movie. Well, did you like it? Yeah, it was great. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
why was it great? Well,
Yes.
it was funny. Well, what type of humor was it? So I'm because as a journalist, you're always our editors would always, when they turn the story back to you, say, this is good, but I
Mhm.
need to understand, I need to get a clear visual picture of what was going on. Or so start
Mhm.
really thinking about details, about even the way somebody drinks their water, those kinds of things, and just get used to doing that because I think so many people, and maybe it's, pardon me, that we're in this kind of quick, we're in a hurry, let me text her kind of attitude. So
Yes.
you just don't have a lot of details. But do you have other advice that you could give as far as just becoming a good writer, if that makes sense?
Hmm. I struggle with grammar and even spelling, and writing for me, that my challenge was just as you described,
Hmm.
right? Like being more verbose than I wanted naturally to be.
Hmm.
And I think part of that is because I had this marketing history. Like I used to writing short headlines, make it short, make it small, make it crisp, um, which is a skill in and of itself. But in this, what I do in the writing process is when I come to the page the next day, I reread what I wrote the previous day. And if I can't visualize it, or I notice that in my mind, I'm saying, oh, she opened the door. And on the page, I say, oh, she opened the door. I'm thinking, well, how do they know what the door looks like? And I'll go back and add detail that next day because then I'm sort of seeing it with fresh eyes myself. So I think you have to know your weaknesses. For me, I know that I am horrible at grammar and comma use, and sometimes I stack my sentences this way, when it should be that way. And so after the developmental edit, I came back, I filled in the rest of the story, got it as good as I thought I could get it. And then I went to a regular editor and had them really line edit me because I knew that's my weakness. So if that's, not everybody's, but you have to know what you're dealing with in order to play to your strengths and to build on your weaknesses.
It reminds me of recording music. So I used to interview a lot of record producers and musicians, and they would talk, you get this 5 minute song and you think, oh, that's a great song. How long did it take for you to produce that? An hour? And oh no, we worked on that one song for 3 days,
Yeah.
layering every track and changing things. And then, oh, the drums are too loud and just layering it. And so what I'm hearing and what I'm getting out of this is also a certain amount of discipline and patience is necessary to be a writer as well, because it isn't necessarily going to just, flow right out of your mouth and onto the page. But you mentioned tech, you mentioned writing style. What about AI? How do you feel about AI? Do you use it? What's the future of it? Is it one of
Oh,
those depends on how you use it? I mean, what are your feelings?
this is a hot topic, and I have to tell you, I think if writers don't use AI, they're missing the boat. And I don't mean for writing. Let me be really clear about that. I mean for research, because one of the beauties of the algorithms out there today, and they're just getting better every single day, is they can take vast amount of information and condense them so you don't have to do all of this different research all over on one topic. I mean, you can really get compounded summaries in an instant, and that's new. So that's for scene building and stuff like that. That's I think that's really important. And then just for resources, it can be super important too. If you want to know, dear AI bot, what are all agents that are open to submissions right now who care about women's fiction? It will return you a list. I mean, this is game changing in that sort of way. So I would encourage writers to think about it not for writing their book, but for doing all the other things that are non-creative in writing. It can be a big game changer, and that's kind of how I feel about technology in general, especially having worked in big tech. I think, the first to market advantage is true. And if there's a new technology, check it out. See how you can use it, see what you can take from it. And go from there. And is it going to write a novel beautifully? Absolutely not. I think some of these generated or AI enhanced novels are disjointed. And right, as a reader, you just kind of feel it because it's not a person writing it. And so you don't get that connection that you would normally get. You don't get the breadcrumbs, you don't get the fullness of the story. So that's impossible. Now, when it comes to art, this is a huge topic. People get so mad when they see an AI art cover. And I personally designed my own cover. But I am not mad at people who want to do an AI art cover. Good for them. That's their choice, and I think it should be a choice. But artists in general should be compensated for the work. Let me just say that. I mean, that's the one red flag about this AI art is it's really difficult for a bot that's been trained on this training data to know if they're having a copyright infringement on a work that exists that's maybe not in their set of training data. So this is kind of where we're at with the AI stuff and the AI art. So I say, it's better to hire a creative to do your art. I wouldn't recommend using it to write words and stories. But for research, yeah, you should be doing that.
Great. So here's where you give out for more information. How can you get my book? Where do you
Yeah.
go? What do you do?
Yes, yes, yes. So my book, An Audacious Woman, is available in all of the formats. So paperback, ebook, Kindle, and audiobook. So wherever you get your audio books, it will be there. For ebook, it is on Amazon. You can go there now and get it. And for paperback, it's also on Amazon and coming soon to libraries and bookstores. So right now, that's where I'm at. I'm working to get them into libraries and bookstores. So coming soon, and yeah, it should be great. If you're in the Pacific Northwest, keep an eye out on some of my social media profiles. I'm going to be having an author event in August. Most likely in Kirkland. We're sort of aligning on the venue. So yeah, keep an eye out for that.
Thanks once again for listening to All the Way Authentic. I'm your host, Kevin P. Henry. Today we spoke with author Corinne Cavanaugh about her new novel, An Audacious Woman. This has been All the Way Authentic.